For most people who visit the British Museum today, it's one of the greatest displays of historical artefacts in the world, and only a small percentage of their objects in their collection are actually on display across a number of floors and dozens of rooms. The exhibitions tell the story of the ancient world from then all up until today. But for some, the British Museum is one of the most hated buildings in the world, and it is despised and actually seen as a symbol of colonialism, an oppressive regime, and the suffering of people who were conquered. That's because inside the museum there are a huge number of objects that have disputed ownership, and countries today have tried to claim that these items should be returned to them. But why is the British Museum so hated? The British Museum was established on the 7th of June 1753, over 270 years ago, and it holds around 8 million objects in its collection. Each year, around 6 million people pass through the doors and lose themselves in the story of history and the world, told through some incredible items such as the Rosetta Stone, artefacts from the mausoleum of Hieroglyphics, or Egyptian mummies. The British Museum has everything. Now, all museums across the world have artefacts from other cultures, countries and places, and it's what makes the conservation of historical museums go. In a local museum near me, there's a couple of Egyptian mummies, and there's also a dinosaur fossil found in a different part of the world. Museums to begin with began as collections of curiosities, in which wealthy people showed off items that they had paid a lot of money for. When collectors died, then often organisations absorbed their collections, and over time museums grew and grew with the objects that they had. Most objects within the British Museum are either acquired through donation or gifts, or they are purchased today through legitimate means at auction, with people properly compensated for these objects. The British Museum's collection is huge, but there are a number of objects within the collection which attract a huge amount of criticism and controversy because of their links to conquest and the suffering of people. The Parthenon Marbles, known formerly as the Elgin Marbles, are sculptures from the Parthenon Temple on the Acropolis in Athens. They were taken under rather, let's say, shady means. They were acquired by a British man named Thomas Bruce, the 7th Earl of Elgin, when he became the ambassador to Greece. Greece was at the time occupied by the Ottoman Empire, and Elgin claimed that the sculptures were in a bad way, broken up in pieces on the ground, following explosions, near to the Parthenon. But Elgin brought them back to England to allegedly protect them from further damage. There is much debate around this, as Elgin took the objects with permission from those occupying Greece and not the Greeks themselves. Today the British Museum even has published a pamphlet around the controversial statues and items, which include huge friezes, and in it it's argued that the sculptures would have been destroyed if they weren't saved. There's also the Benin Bronzes, metal plaques and sculptures that decorated the royal palace of the Kingdom of Benin. There were thousands of them, and Benin at the time was one of the richest cultures in Africa, but they were taken by British forces during the Benin expedition of 1897, as the British controlled the region of southern Nigeria. The expedition was launched allegedly in retaliation for the massacre of a group of British envoys. After their capture, 200 pieces were transferred to the British Museum, and other bits were placed in other museums around the world. The issue with these is that they were taken in a pure act of theft in retribution and are seen today as spoils of war, relating to the slaughter of others. There is a call to hand the bronzes back to Nigeria, and the Dutch have already handed a number of them back, but the British Museum still holds their collection today. Even the Rosetta Stone is disputed by the Egyptians, and they want their priceless stone back in their own country. There's countless more objects too, including a Maui, an Easter Island statue that sits as one of the most important objects in their whole collection. Even some Welsh people are not happy as important cultural items relating to periods of warfare, when the Welsh fought against the English, are today locked up behind cases in England. Another controversy relating to the British Museum relates to World War II. The British Museum acquired thousands of artefacts in the 20th century, but many of them have debatable provenance, during the period of the Third Reich in Germany from 1933 to 1945. We know that the Nazis plundered art collections, and some of the artwork was later acquired by the museum. In 2005, a High Court judge ruled that it would have been illegal for the museum to return artworks looted by the Nazis to a Jewish couple, despite morally it being right to do so. But this law was then changed twice, and the museum were given additional powers to return the looted and stolen art, or to offer some form of compensation. There was also the problem of lost and stolen artefacts. There have been major thefts in which a number of items worth hundreds of thousands have been taken. A Cartier diamond has gone missing since 2017. There's also around £250,000 of Roman coins that have also gone missing. It was claimed that in 15 years alone, 2,000 artefacts and antiques had been stolen and taken. Today I would suggest that the reputation of the British Museum is linked closely to the suffering inflicted upon people with regards to the conquering that the British Empire did. People who come from certain countries which were under occupation and control by the British have claimed that items within the museum are related to conquest, which caused a huge amount of suffering. Let's remember that the British Empire were notorious for keeping people in terror. For example, in India, they even shot people to pieces who were tied to the end of a cannon, who were rebelling against the British, their oppressors. But it's not just the British Museum who face these criticisms. Museums around the world have the same problem. The Louvre, for example, has a statue from Easter Island too, and a painting stolen by Napoleon, which has never been returned to Italy. There's also the Neues Museum in Berlin that has a bust of Nefertiti, and since the 1920s, for a century, Egypt has been trying to get a return for the statue, saying it was actually stolen from the country by German archaeologists illegally. But there probably isn't an establishment which so blatantly refuses to return certain items to countries where items are so valued and cherished. The British Museum Act of 1963 forbids the British Museum and the Natural History Museum from disposing of their holdings and items, and practically bars the museum from handing items back to their countries of origin. This law bans the repatriation of such items, so it would be illegal, and in a sense a crime in Britain, to negotiate a return of, say, the Benin Bronzes. My opinion on the British Museum is that it's one of the greatest repositories of historical items in the world, and the fact it tells the story of the world and history is a huge treasure. But items which hold such cultural significance to other nations should be considered for repatriation possibly. As someone who is British, seeing the Benin Bronzes, for example, or not, wouldn't impact my visit, but it would mean a lot for the people of Nigeria. The British Museum is a place of incredible items, but we must remember where some of them items came from and how some of these objects actually came into the possession of a huge building and organisation slap bang in the centre of London. This has been History of the World, and I hope you've learned something new, and if you have, click the subscribe button.